Greetings and salutations, friends. I'm Mara, and welcome to the channel. For the last couple of years, I've considered myself an unwilling housewife. No, I'm not being held by force. No handmaids here. I left the workforce 2 years ago like many others did, but when lockdown ended, I wasn't able to work. Well, not like I could before. Years of poorly treated chronic physical and mental illnesses had taken their toll long before lockdown. My body and brain finally revolted, and here we are. Before we get into the project, here's a little background. I come from a family of creatives, makers, artists, and nerds, but my biggest inspiration comes from my mom. My mom, like many in her family before her, expresses herself in her beautiful gardens, her incredible food, as well as her sewing and embroidery. I ended up leaning into these skills heavily during lockdown to stay sane, starting a vegetable garden, experimenting with food, and sewing. You've probably guessed that sewing led me to YouTube, which led me to Costube, but that's neither unheard of nor surprising. If you know me, I do love me a rabbit hole. So, now that you've gotten the backstory, let's get into the project. Now, I didn't start this sewing journey with grand plans for elaborate gowns. History bounding interests me because much of historical dress focuses on shape rather than size. And it was through history bounding that I learned about the glory of natural fibers and temperature regulation. Temperature regulation is huge when you live in a somewhat tropical climate and you're prone to hot flashes. Then I started playing with patterns and shapes, making different articles, and learning a ton. Somewhere along the way, a dear friend procured a dress form for me. I was quietly puttering along, planning a channel, but had no real set schedule. Honestly, I was just content to be making beautiful things that felt as good as they looked. Then, Liz made a kirtle. Honestly, it was the word kirtle that attracted my attention. A character with kirtle in her name? A character from a book I'd read perhaps, probably as a child. I read a lot as a kid. But medieval? She has to be medieval, she's wearing a kirtle. But I didn't read a lot of proper medieval literature unless you count old European fairy tales. But I kept seeing an illustration of a lady in a green kirtle. Eventually I remembered that it's 2022 and I have Google, and I Googled Lady of the Green Kirtle. Boom! I had a hit. Was she a medieval sorceress from a forgotten fairy tale of my childhood? Perhaps a maiden from the Canterbury Tales? Nope. She was a character from the freaking chronicles of freaking Narnia. Yep. That Narnia. The Silver Chair, to be precise. If you're unfamiliar with the book, it's a good one. The BBC adaptation is also a treat, featuring Tom Baker, the Fourth Doctor. I wasn't drawn by the story, but by the image of the character and the green dress she wore. To reveal more would reveal spoilers, and that's another show. So I endeavored to make a kirtle with a similar theme to the lady. And that's where I ran into my first hurdle, because I ordered my linen from Ukraine in March. Absolutely no fault to the seller, who I've linked in the description. She's entirely blameless, and I'm just happy to support Ukrainian artisans. I highly recommend you do the same. Needless to say, there's been a delay in the final project. So I shifted my focus to pattern drafting in the mock-up, using my dress form and some stiff unwashed muslin, as well as Morgan Donner's Kirtle tutorial video as a guide. I drafted a rough pattern into a rough mock-up and drafted a paper pattern accordingly. As my dress form lacks arms, my beloved long-suffering spouse assisted with the sleeve patterns. Now that I had my pattern, I was ready to make my mock-up. Using fabric from my stash and a whole lot of piecing, I had just enough to make a slightly too short kirtle. And then came the sewing. And sewing. And a small bout of pneumonia. And more sewing. And eyelets. So many eyelets. And buttonholes. So many buttonholes. But when you're stuck on the sofa and you can barely talk, tedious sewing becomes an excellent diversion. In case you're wondering, I do own a sewing machine. I own a couple actually, but I rarely use them. They both work just fine, mostly, but lately I found that I really do prefer hand sewing. The whole reason I started this exercise was to relax and enjoy myself, so why fuss over a machine that only gives me hell and it's really crappy tension? Frankly, my hand sewing skills are far greater than my machine sewing skills. Like many other aspects of my life, I have a hard time sewing straight. But I digress. I do that a lot. Actually, this is an ADHD household, and I think this is where we're supposed to cut to the reveal. After roughly 8 million years, the Kirtle was done. Is it a mock-up? Yes. Is it abso-freaking-lutely amazing? Also yes. Does it have absolutely nothing to do with any of my original inspirations? Kinda yeah. I'm calling this Kirtle my Minerva dress, because of all the owls. My Lady of the Green Kirtle will come about when my linen arrives. I can be patient, I think. Also, I think I might change the design up a bit. Summer's coming fast, and detachable sleeves seem really tempting in that tropical climate. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Well, friends, that's the end of my first video. A million thanks to you all for watching, to Liz Capism for inspiring the project, to Morgan Donner for her awesome tutorial, they're linked below, and to my spouse for his help, support, and sacrificing our living room. I've really been enjoying sharing my work, and I'd love to hear what you're making. Life permitting, I plan to be posting these every 2 weeks. That said, time is meaningless and we all live in perpetual chaos. But chaos permitting, I'll be back in a couple of weeks. Be sure to like and subscribe, and be sure to check out my Instagram. Cheers! One more time. This is not the 90s, Jesus. Think like you're a general of a freaking resistance. Think like Carrie Fisher. What would she do? She'd flip off the camera